looking forward to our session this afternoon with Marc. I know there's a lot in here to unpack, so I'm really looking forward to being guided through some cutting-edge research. We're a small enough group that I think we can probably have some conversation after Marc speaks. So if you have comments, questions, reactions, you can keep those going. To those of you who are joining us online, thank you so much for being here. I know this is not your first rodeo, so you can just feel free to add comments and questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get those also as part of our kind of conversation at the end. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Marc.
Well, merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde, comment ça va? Yeah? Okay, yeah, and also with you, oui, okay. So my name is Marc Jolicoeur. I am I'm a French Canadian, kind of. So actually, I grew up in Eastern Canada, so in a province called New Brunswick. But my father grew up like 20 kilometers as the crow flies from here in a place called Boucherville, Quebec. He learned to speak English when he was in his 20s in the Navy. So he learned all the good words first and kind of worked backwards from there. So that's a little bit of kind of a background from where I am. I am what is known as a creative and worship arts pastor in my local church in Moncton, New Brunswick. So raise your hands if you're Canadian. All right, that's about a 50-50 split, look at that. So even for those of you who are Canadian, if you're not from the East Coast, you know, there's no presumptions. So New Brunswick, right, the province that's just this way, or this way, to the right of us. I'm in Moncton. So New Brunswick is the only officially bilingual province in this officially bilingual country of ours, and Moncton is sort of the unofficial bilingual hub of that place. And so like we have a really, really strong English-French divide. So I was able to sit in a wonderful session earlier on where somebody was talking about pidgin languages, you know, the idea of, and I had to look up the difference between a pidgin and a Creole, and I still don't really understand, to be honest with you. But the bottom line is that where I'm from, we have one that's called Chiac, and it's sort of that'd be the common way of calling it. It's a Franglish would be another way of saying it, so English and French kind of thrown together. And the word that I want to bring to the fore right now is one that I've already heard multiple times, which is code switching. Everyone knows the familiarity with that. It's kind of what we're doing right now. We're going to do some code switching. So, because for the most part, what I've noticed is that this has not mostly been about contemporary praise and worship. Most of whatever that terminology might mean to you, that's not really what we've been talking about mostly at this amazing conference so far. But that's almost exclusively what we're going to be talking about in here. So you're familiar with it, you know what it is, it's part of your language database for the most part. So we're going to kind of code switch over to that. Now this could be over lightning quick if all we do is just kind of plow through this information, because I am not the resident expert, actually. The reason I think that I'm here in some respects is because I have the ability to kind of code switch in a certain way. So I am, I jokingly say, like I'm like a card-carrying evangelical. Like I teach and I serve at an evangelical church in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. So hi, welcome, glad to be here. And it has been an amazing time. You guys have been super, super hospitable, and this has been a very, very educating time for me. But that's kind of my native kind of theological language, as it were. And I'm a part of this team of people. There you go, that's me, that's one of them. But then we've got some excellent people on this team. So three doctors and another Canadian artist named Elias. One of them's right there. Hi, Adam, how you doing? Adam Press. And so what happened was a couple years ago, I got tapped to work with a gentleman named Mike Tapper, who is a researcher and a president of, the lead of a religion department in Southern Wesleyan University, to take a look at what we would describe as the life curves of worship songs primarily in kind of like churches that use contemporary praise and worship. So we wanted to see how long they stay in the public consciousness in churches. And the long and short of it is they're staying less time now than they used to before. Surprise. In the process of that research, we were able to connect with the other wonderful people who are on this team, through podcasts or through kind of conversations. And slowly some kind of affinity for each other kind of emerged. We said, what would it be like if we did some research together? And that's kind of where worshipleaderresearch.com was born. And I should say right off here that we're grateful for the folks at the Calvin Institute who were able to fund a good portion of what we were able to do with this most recent project. So we joined together in near the end of 2021, and we just kind of started throwing some things against the wall and started wondering what might stick. The first thing that we had was a list of CCLI songs going all the way back to 88 or 89, depending upon how you view it, kind of its inception. I don't want to belabor what CCLI might mean if everybody knows what that is. So, does anybody not know what CCLI might mean? Super. So we had those lists of top 100 songs and went back to there. And we said, what could we do with this? Well, Shannon Baker, I believe, is one of the people who presented early on. It might be wise for us to try to broaden our scope of information, because often there's been a lot of people who've done some really, really great work with CCLI lists to look at it and try to figure out what are these trends, what are they saying about what churches are singing, but it's also, we know that it's limited. And so we also decided to bring on board another chart program called Praise Charts. People heard of Praise Charts before? So it's kind of like what they do, Praise Charts is a little bit different. They are kind of more of a resourcing wing than they are a wing that's kind of collecting royalties to go to licensing. So they will give charts that are based upon actual recordings of songs. So, hey, you want to play Waymaker like Leland does, here's a chart that is not just kind of like the copyrighted material, but the actual transcript of how that plays. And so because of that, actually we found that more churches who are kind of black churches or who do gospel type music are more likely and inclined to use that kind of chart program than they might be to do CCLI. So it was the best thing that we could kind of find to try to broaden the scope of the data. So we brought those over, we cross-referenced those lists, and then we started kind of asking some questions. So the question that we mostly wanted to try to understand was, how do worship leaders feel about the industry? The industry is probably a bit of a loaded question, but for lack of a better word, the mechanisms, the things that get songs into their hands, how do they feel about that? One thing I'd say too is if you got great memory, that's awesome, but if you're like, oh, I want to ask a question, you can like just make a little pencil note, or you can just like, you can blurt out if you want to, but maybe I'll answer it later. So, but yeah, it'd be awesome because, like I said, this could go by pretty quick. So, how do they feel about the industry? How do they choose the songs that they choose? And then how do those songs end up as choices in the first place? And that was kind of what we mostly kind of wanted to try to come to terms with. So as I mentioned, we started by adding both the CCLI lists and the praise chart lists together. And we wanted to look at a quantifiable, like measurable time frame. So we looked at the decade between 2010 and 2020, and we only wanted to look at songs that were both written and released during that time frame. This is an important caveat because, as you might see later on, there'll be a bunch of people, especially if you're familiar with the scene, there'll be a bunch of people whose names will not show up on this list, and you'll have to wonder why. And the reason is because they did not write the songs that you're thinking of during that period of time. They wrote them before, or maybe it's even some of them in 2021 or later, right? So this is really specific. We wanted to look at that time frame. So during that time frame, there were, just looking at the top 100, there were 182 unique songs that were listed on the CCLI charts, 157 unique songs that made it into the top 100 in the praise charts. And so we wanted to look at ones that were listed in both, and that gave us a total of 108 songs to look at and to categorize. By all means. Yeah, so that's a good question. The question was like, what does that number mean? So between between 2010 and 2020, I mean, depending if they were annual charts or biannual charts, then like on one of those charts, that song would show up in the top 100. That's a good question. So 108 kind of collated between them, and that was what we ended up working with. And we did some work on the top 100, but we focused mostly later on the top 25. For two reasons. One, it makes it a bit more manageable. You want to look at numbers that you can kind of understand. But also two, and sometimes I describe myself often in this scenario as a bit of a parrot. One of the strengths that I have is that I'm a little bit less educated than a lot of people, so it means that in some ways I have a naivete that I can bring and ask questions, and I don't mind. So that's one strength. The other thing is I can just kind of repeat things that I hear. So here's what I've heard. There's this thing called the long tail effect. What that seems to imply is that the higher you get up in the chart, it gets exponential in terms of what your impact is. So you might think that, say, like a top 26 song and a top 19 song, it's a difference of like a factor of 7 in terms of that. But it's actually, like it goes higher and higher. So the higher you get up in the charts, it's much, much greater impact in terms of how long the songs are there, how many people are singing them, how much influence they have. So that's the second reason that we decided to focus on the top 25. After we were influenced and kind of took a look at that stuff and tried to take it nice and slow, like I said, we got together in 2021, so we spent about a year just kind of talking and thinking and asking questions. And then we put together a survey. And that survey went live in 2022. We had somebody we brought in somebody who's a sociologist from Crandall University. His name's Sam Reimer, to kind of make sure that the questions that we were asking were good. Now, they were good, but after we asked them, sure we'd love another chance at those questions, as you'll see as we go along here. But that's, if you're gonna do a survey, it's tough to pick the exact right questions. But nonetheless, we had 417 respondents to the survey, and these were worship leaders. And so it was I'm a runner, so I say, whenever you're gonna do a race, you normally have like a goal that you say out loud and the one that you don't say out loud. So, maybe the number that we had that was not said out loud was a little higher than 417. But nonetheless, 417 is a pretty good representative sample, as you'll see as we go along here. So we kind of broke these up into 2 phases, and the survey was phase 2. So phase 1 is what we kind of ended up calling a quantitative review, which looked at numbers, right? We looked at the volume of songs. We looked at who released those songs. We looked at how those things correlated. And then phase 2 was more of a qualitative. So how do people in the worship industry, worship leaders themselves, how do they feel about the players? How do they feel about these songs? So we had kind of started working towards what the phase 1 release was going to look like before we rolled out the survey. And then we rolled out, the results of the survey only got released 2 weeks ago at this point in time, might be a little bit less actually. And now we're kind of working forward and bringing those 2 phases together. So both the numbers and then how people feel about the numbers. So for phase 1, we ended up releasing what's essentially kind of like 2 headlines, for lack of a better word, 2 kind of major takeaways, and then some thoughts that we were able to kind of garner in real time from people as they were giving us feedback to be able to kind of nuance the conversation. So I should say, we could caveat this thing all day long. I already gave you the caveat about the survey numbers. We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is not representative of, not all the churches in the world. It's not representative of all the churches in North America. It's not representative of, it is a subset of churches. But we also do feel like it's the best data that we have. And so if you have a list of what other churches are singing in your back pocket and you'd like to share afterwards, we'd be very inclined to take that information from you. We're going to talk about some next steps maybe near the end, but this is, we believe, really good, and yet it is limited. We have to understand that it is limited. So the first kind of major takeaway, the first major takeaway that we had, it's what it says apparently is almost 100% of the top 25 worship songs are associated with just a handful of mega churches. So I know. Just take a moment, let it rest, catch your breath. When this information was shared in other public spaces, it was shared a little bit more. I use the word salaciously to say that, if you feel like all worship songs sound alike, it's because they do. Those kinds of things. We did not write those headlines. We can't claim ownership of that. But we can claim ownership of this here. So this is a breakdown of what the top 25 charts look like for those periods of time. And you'll see, if you take a look, well, that doesn't look like a handful of mega churches. You've got a lot of people represented there. first glance, it looks like you might even have 14 different contributors that are listed. So, deal. Well, after some time, what we were able to take a look at was that if you account for collaborations, so these are essentially connection points in the background. So, for example, like an artist who is affiliated directly with one of these megachurch movements, be they be signed to the record label, whether it means that they're co-writing regularly with these places, whether it means maybe they were launched from one of these churches. So through collaborations, and then also through what we call performance history, we were able to collapse these down to what we see as essentially 5 megachurches, with one of them kind of being a bit of an outlier, and that's in North Point, which is responsible for one of the songs that made it onto that list. Now, if you want to see our work, my wife is an elementary school teacher, so if you give the right math answer but you can't give your work, then I know that's frowned upon. If you want to see, so there's an example here, I think a germane example, because tomorrow evening we'll be led in worship by Leslie Jordan of All Sons and Daughters, and David Leonard, I believe, one of the people on our team actually had the opportunity to have a conversation with David Leonard, who is the other kind of co-writer on this one particular song, and I don't think he had any pushback on how we walked through this process. You can ask him if he does. So if you take a look on our website, worshipleaderresearch.com, for each of these songs, we have examples of what we call the performance history. And you can kind of, this is not a dynamic slide, so I won't be able to show that with you. But it will show how when the song was released, it had a certain amount of notoriety. But then when the song was covered by one of these other megachurches, most often Bethel, but sometimes Passion, Hillsong doesn't really do cover so much. So when you see that that's released by YouTube from a live performance at one of their venues or churches, you'll see that within a matter of months, the placement on the charts of those songs grows and grows and grows till the time that it finally gets up into the top 25. So that's what we mean by performance history. Because that was one of the major questions that we had, what are you talking about? So Shannon and Elias did a lot of work on individually digging down on those songs and kind of creating song stories for them, and I hope you'll find it compelling. Another question that came up a lot, and Adam Perez is the one who fielded this one a lot, is isn't this just the same thing that it's always been, right? Haven't there always been a handful of hymn writers, a handful of contemporary worship practitioners who are just better than other people, and therefore their content rises to the top? And Adam took a good amount of time to walk through the process to explain there are continuities and there are discontinuities, similarities, and dissimilarities between how things were, particularly not necessarily in hymn writing, although I think you can probably draw some analogs there, but more about like the 70s and 80s and 90s, how things changed as we rolled into the 2000s. So if you want to read more about that, these are all available in article format on our website, worshipleaderresearch.com. Those were kind of 2 response pieces. The second headline piece that we released was, since 2017, 100% of the top 25 songs, again, on our collated list, have been singles. What does that mean? You guys remember singles? Oh, LPs? The other side of them? That's great, B-sides. Obviously, the term single is kind of loaded and has also kind of changed in our recent times. But what it means is the industry, in this case, and I don't use that word as a pejorative. I just mean like the business people who are behind these songs. When they specifically highlight certain songs and they release those songs as being of notoriety kind of above and beyond the broader corpus of the songs that they'd be releasing. So if you release 10 songs, you often will select 1, 2, or 3 of those for special consideration. That's kind of what we mean when we say they're released as singles. So this is the volume. I'm turning around because the way that my setup is here, I can't really see it easily on my screen. So during that decade in question, the big 4, which is also what we kind of shorthanded to call Elevation, Bethel, Passion, and Hillsong. And Hillsong, when you're looking at these charts, what can be kind of confusing is you'll see Hillsong United and Hillsong Worship kind of disaggregated, but we treat them most of the time as a single unit. They released a lot of songs. On average, they would release 120, or yeah, they released 126 songs together. Oh, wait, okay, sorry. On average, each of them released 126 songs. What it basically looks like is most of these churches are releasing about an album a year. So that means that they're putting out about, 10 songs kind of per annum, which is not always exactly the case, but you can see it amounts to quite a volume, which is actually one of the first questions that we had. One of the first questions that we had when we got together was, do people feel overwhelmed with the volume of worship material that's coming their way for choice? Like, do they feel kind of like, what am I supposed to do with this onslaught? And when we finally looked at the numbers, we go, there sure are a lot of them. How is it that with all of this material, a certain number of them rise to the top? Most often people just assume that it's the best songs are the ones that are chosen, which may or may not be the case, but as you can see here, so here we go. So the red on the bottom, these are top 100. These were songs that made it into the top 100 that were singles. And the yellow are singles that were released but that didn't make it into the top 100. So as you can see, except for Hillsong United, yellow is smaller than red. So more often than not, the songs that were released that were singles were the ones that made it up into the top 100. And this is overall during that decade, but if you break it down and look at it in terms of a chronological approach, you'll see that as things go, by the year 2017, it was only songs that were released as singles that made it into the top 25. It got tighter and tighter and tighter. So after we kind of chewed on that for a little while and let it rest, and we had already started to put together the survey questions, we had received the survey analysis. In the interest of full disclosure, there was a reward for the survey. We chose a winner of a $500 Sweetwater gift card, and that was paid for by Integrity Music, but we gave no special considerations to Integrity at all, I promise. I don't even know which songs are Integrity, so it's fine. We, as I mentioned, we released these the survey results just a few weeks ago, and we are in the process now of really kind of just starting to slowly move through what these might mean. There's a full list available again at worshipleaderresearch.com. If you could take a look at it, we're pretty happy about not just the way that the data shows up, but there's also something called a data explorer. So, and I won't be able to show you that here, but if you need technical help, I can show you afterwards. It essentially gives you the ability to go through and to create your own report, as it were. So any of these questions you can go through and you can splice out and say, I just want to see what it looks like for ages 18 to 24. I just want to see what it looks like for males. I just want to see what it looks like for, and you can kind of select those things out. And I don't believe that the full data has been made available yet in terms of being able to do like cross, like say you want to see what Methodists who are 18 to 24 and happen to be female, how they feel about that. We haven't quite gotten to that open access point yet. Yes, it's a per question kind of thing. So maybe more to come, we'll see. So here you go, you can kind of see some survey demographics. Overwhelmingly, worship leaders that we were surveyed were male, which I was a little bit surprised by that. I am a male, but in the context that I've been, I have seen an awful lot of female leadership, so I was surprised to see that. One of the things that's a bit of a takeaway, which we were able to kind of confirm recently, is in terms of church size, we're pretty happy to say that our representation seems to match pretty well what Lifeway Research has recently been releasing. So of the we had 270 respondents who were in a church size between 51 and 500. And so it's a pretty good median size. When we take a look at the next slide here, you're going to see here's the denominational representation, and you're going to, if you can see close enough at the bottom, man, it's an awful lot of Wesleyans. So 2 of the 5 of us that are on the team are kind of nested pretty well into a denomination that's called the Wesleyan Church. Apparently, we promoted it a little bit too well. Because it's a pretty small denomination, all things considered, but it seems like it had a lot of respondents. But nonetheless, pretty good breadth. So we released just a handful of these little kind of vignettes on what's going on, and here's one of them here. It says, how do you feel about the number of new songs that are promoted for congregational use? I just realized that I could take this off. What? Evolutionary. Yeah, so how do you feel about that? So, because remember, one of the presuppositions we had when we went into it was we feel like people are probably going to be overwhelmed because every time, I don't know, again, I can't tell who's who and what's what, but since I've been here, in the last 3 hours, I've received 2 or 3 emails from resourcing organizations telling me that I have a new track available, I have a new pad loop that's available for me, I have, like there's all these things that kind of come. So you're constantly, I mean, if you're in the kind of world in which I reside, you're constantly being made aware of every new song that kind of comes out. So I kind of presumed that a lot of people were going to be a little bit overwhelmed, but the numbers were a little bit surprising and or ambiguous, and this maybe comes down to how survey questions themselves are not always the full story. So I don't want to rock anybody's world here, but data is just data until you interpret it. It just kind of lies there. So it seems like 44% would love a little bit less, but 27% said they actually want more songs. We wrestled with this quite a bit to try to figure out who or what or how and why. Would anybody want more of these songs? But I got to admit that since I've been here, just in the last few days, and it's crossed my mind that there's maybe some people who are saying, I want different songs. I want songs that say different things. I want songs that give voice to concerns that I'm not seeing. So it would be different to say, I just want more, and it might be, I want different. And I think that that could be a slightly different way of nuancing that information. Here, let me see. Okay, so next one here was, I can't even see what that says now. Can I move that? I don't know how to move that. Oh, look at that, you're gone. Can I put it over there? Praise him. Give him praise. Okay, so, come on now. When considering a song for congregational use, how important is the song's association with an artist or church to your decision on whether to use it? So in other words, like, does the fact that this song is by Hillsong or Bethel matter to you? Again, a little bit surprising numbers, I think. So for 44%, it was unimportant, and for 40%, it seemed to be quite important. But what does that mean? We dug into the comments, which Adam has been doing pretty diligently. We're not all the way through it yet, but it turns out that, again, this could kind of mean multiple things. So if I said to you, it's not important for me about this, that this song is by this particular artist, what I could mean is I'm judging the song on its own merits, and I want to sing this song because it resonates well with my heart. That's something it's valuable to me. And that's something that we encountered dozens and dozens and dozens of times in comments and in responses, with people saying, regardless of scandal, regardless of theological difference, I just love these songs. My congregation loves these songs, and I intend to keep leading these songs. So that's kind of what that could mean. It also could mean I don't think it's important that the song comes from the source. I'm not going to value it any more highly just because it seems to be coming down the pipeline from one of these major megachurches. So the very same response could be weighted in either a positive or negative direction. It kind of depends upon how you view that data. And so a little bit of ambiguity there, one might say. Question 3, how likely would you say you are to select a song for congregational use that is associated with? So we asked, more generally speaking, hey, is this important to you? And then we got granular. What about this artist? What about this artist? What about this artist? Now, we did this, compiled these questions before we had locked in on the kind of big four as a top 25. So you're going to see actually a bit of a broader range of people. So Jesus culture happens to be in there, for example, vertical worship, Cody Carnes and Carrie Job. So bottom line is you're going from less to more. And so before I give you, what the big takeaway was, did anybody notice anything interesting right away? It is relatively even across the board. Yeah, that's fair. Phil Wickham. Man, people love Phil Wickham. They love him. They love this guy. Does anybody know who Phil Wickham is? People know who Phil Wickham is? I gotta see those hands. I see those hands. Yeah, Phil Wickham. They love this guy. And it is surprising, possibly, because does anybody see who maybe like the least liked, as it were, artist or group would be? It's Bethel by a narrow margin above Jesus culture, yeah. And Jesus culture, of course, was planted out of Bethel. So Bethel, unsurprising, if you've heard of them, they are controversial. In a number of our conversations that we have with people, they often will use the word, it's been in print multiple times alongside of our work and our faces, but there's scandal at these churches. I don't really, you're not gonna find a whole lot of things maybe are categorical of scandal, but at the very least, people are theologically divided about the practices and the theology of a church like Bethel. And I think that's represented pretty well in these numbers. But Phil, as I call him, Phil, apparently, we're on a first name basis, he is pretty, I think, even though he's not touting it from the rooftops, he has not denied and seems to be pretty comfortable with people knowing that he owes much of his platform to a church, not just like Bethel, but a church that happens to be Bethel. He has co-written a number of songs with Brian Johnson and other writers from Bethel. And if we look back to sort of the song that launched him into this particular stratosphere, he's been around for a while, This is Amazing Grace. And again, we have a song story on that one. It would not have been, quite likely, causation and correlation are tough things to draw out, but it quite likely would not have been in the category that it was if it had not been platformed by Bethel Church. So it's interesting to see just how well liked and received he is and how suspicious people are of the actual church in question. It's also notable that this is in 22. So yes, this is almost a year ago that we asked these questions, probably closer to 9 months. Hillsong has the highest trust. I think that's all I'll say on that one for now, but I think it's interesting. Do you wish your church was more similar in worship culture style to the churches and or artists that were previously mentioned? More than half said yes, at least sometimes. And again, this is another question. What does that mean? And so it could mean we would love it if our musicians were able to shred the way that the people can in these recordings. So we would love some more musical chops. Could mean I'd love it if we had the lumen power of the lights that they have at these locations. But, and this is, we have to get into conjecture, because if we don't conjecturize, nobody seems to care. Quite likely, it's a lot more, I just wish that my church Sunday morning passionate experience looked more like what the experience is on the YouTube videos that I see of these songs when they're led in these other churches. I wish I saw more physical response. I wish I heard more passionate singing. I just wish it was more like that. Again, we can't say with utter certainty, but some of the comments do seem to bear that out. Last one here before we, or maybe just one more here after this. I believe new songs are promoted for congregational use, and I believe that they are primarily written in response to, we made them choose two so that they couldn't get off with just choosing one. Most people said they believed that the worship songs in questions were written in response to events in the writer's own life. And the lowest number of responses was due to contractual obligations, which It sounds good. We also have local church needs that were on there. People were not shy about saying that commercial opportunities were on the list as well. So I think part of us want to say that the surprising takeaway is that nobody thought the fact that somebody had a contract that said they needed to deliver so many songs by the end of the year was a motivation for why they might have written the song. People didn't necessarily want to go that far, but as we can see, tons of people were pretty comfortable with the idea of saying, but money was involved, and it might have been to feed their family, it might have been to support their church, but commercial opportunities were pretty high, even higher than divine inspiration. Okay, so I think this is the last one here for now. How likely are you to consider a new song for congregational use when you first encounter it through the following means? Again, this goes back to one of the first questions that we had. So how do people feel about the industry? Why do they choose the songs that they do? And how do they end up being those songs for them to choose in the first place? The highest unlikely, so half of them said that advertising was the least effective in their life. And 76% said that leader requests, church leader requests, pastor, elder, person who holds your job above you, they're most likely to respond to that. That is, I think, not in any way surprising, the last part. But the advertising thing is kind of surprising and also shows a bit of a, not a flaw, but something you need to look for in survey responses. And one that, frankly, we were hoping to be able to crack, but I don't think that we did, which is that people will self-respond what they think, but you need to try to look underneath the hood at what they actually think. So to try to do that early on, one of our hopes, do people know what Planning Center is? Planning Center, it's a planning software, so you can plan your services through that. So it's not only like names and who's gonna do what when, so, but it's also like how you can actually attach songs to a service so that people can have the ability to rehearse those songs, et cetera, in advance. You can also, through Planning Center, and it's very, very popular in this particular strain of worship leading. I use it. So you can report what songs you have led over a 6-month period, up to 6-year period. You can kind of kick those out. So what we're hoping to do is collect a whole bunch of these reports from these churches and say, here's what you as a worship leader say about the way that you feel about certain artists, the way that you feel about certain methods, and here's what the actual programming at your church shows that you actually do. We were able to get, unfortunately, not nearly as many responses as we wanted, and even when we did, it was about 150, but we did, it was much more difficult to collate than we want. So you're gonna see that show up in a what's next, is to try to understand a little bit more behind the actual under the hood, as I keep saying. So we already showed you the kind of the highs and the lows, but one that really stands out for me, as we mentioned, church leaders is very high. Social media and peers, very high. So social media and non-peers, very high. Congregants. But here's the one that I think points to something very important. And I mean, it's probably tug at the heartstrings of people involved here. Right in the middle, live events. This is incredibly anecdotal, but it happens to me all the time, and it just happened to me last week. I was at a district conference for my church. There were a number of songs that were led that I have heard before. I've seen the YouTube videos. I have seen the charts. I know they exist. But after I was led in that song effectively at this conference, and it became a little bit more something that I not only heard, but I experienced, I became much more inclined to think, oh, I'd like other people to sing this song too. It kind of moved a little bit from here to here. It kind of resonated more in my being. So the live events portion of it, these churches are very good at not only doing Sunday morning, but they're very good at hosting large live events. And they're very good, and there's more work to be done here, at capturing these songs in a very live and lively way. So as you'll see here, it's not as though many of these churches are releasing studio albums, Hillsong United maybe being a bit of an outlier in that. They're releasing live recordings of their songs, and they're releasing YouTube videos for all of them that are highly energetic and that are showing you not just a static image, but like a real dynamic experience so that you can almost kind of feel like you're there, right? So it's the closest thing you can have to experience it. They could actually create like little water that sprays on you from the sweat from the worship leader. If they could get to that degree of like, Muppet vision or whatever, then we'd really be across the line. So what? So what, of course? Well, there are millions of Christians who sing these songs week in and week out. So maybe you sing these songs in your church, maybe you don't. And so maybe this could seem like it's outside of the pale, but it's a huge, huge industry, and it's a huge number of Christians who sing these songs. Not only that, they are multilingual, and there are multicultural versions of these songs that are being led all over the world. So if you want to Google one of these songs and then put the word Portuguese after it in YouTube, it would not be surprising to find a version of these songs that are being led in different countries and in different languages, whereas the inverse is not very often the case. I'm not normally combing Brazil or Nigeria for original material from there in a different language so that I can kind of translate it back into an English version to be done here. But there is significant cultural output that's happening globally with these songs. So the writers and or the popularizers of these songs, they have obviously a lot of influence. And as we know, and as we've probably seen here, to a certain degree, we become what we sing. And so it's important for us to understand what's going on with these songs. Better understanding how and why Christian praise and worship planners choose the songs that they do is hopefully going to yield some good results going forward. So this data has already been presented at Duke. It was presented at Duke by some people who are smarter than me, and it's going to be presented in a few weeks in Oxford by other people who are smarter than me. So and it's going in liturgy for an academic journal. So there's real rigorous academic scholarly content that's happening here. But there's also all kinds of blog posts and podcasts and news articles and social media reels. And with all due respect to the scholarly output, those are hitting the ground in different ways and are getting us a little bit closer to the actual kind of practitioners of this stuff. So I think we're incredibly grateful to be able to kind of swim in both streams, to be able to kind of switch between those codes, I guess. So I'd like to invite you, I don't even know how long I've been going. Long enough. So I'd like to invite you at some point in time to check out worshipleaderresearch.com, in particular to check out the survey that has the kind of dynamic stuff, because what we would love to do going forward, we know there's all kinds of other questions that could be asked and questions that could be asked in different ways, but we actually need smart people and interested people like yourselves to ask those kind of questions to us so that together we can try to answer those questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's so much here to unpack, and we have a good amount of time to kind of dive in here. So what I think I would suggest, maybe I'm going to untape this now. Is that okay? I'm going to suggest, especially, we need to have questions into the mic for our online participants. So if you have a question, maybe come up and I think we can just share this mic. I think that's fine. And have a conversation and then go back once you've finished kind of chatting about your question. So does anyone want to start us off here? If I'm ready to go. Okay, awesome. Let's I'll ask my question and then we'll get to you. Does that work? I want to chat a little bit more about Full Wickham. Curious to know why I so associate him with Bethel, why he was the one who wasn't, why his name is the one that wasn't absorbed into a mega church. Do you know more about that decision?
It's a good question. I mean, we can't say for sure. So there's been some recent work that we've been looking at and trying to understand better. I believe Monique Ingalls, is that what I want to say, Adam? Is that the word? So we're just kind of talking about the British invasion and the way, I'm looking at Adam, he knows what's up. Looking at the kind of British invasion and the wave that kind of happened in the 2000s from a kind of a lot of music that was coming from the UK over here. So I'm old enough to be like, at the heart of worship, and so all the Matt Redman stuff and all that Tim Hughes stuff was like, that was my love language. I spoke that deeply. And what it seems like was happening, and what kind of changed a bit of a sea change here, was that people noticed that those artists were not just associated with, but deeply embedded in faith communities. So like, it was like, this song is coming out of Soul Survivor, or whatever. The song is coming out of Holy Trinity Brompton, or whatever. Like they were embedded in the church, whereas that was kind of the heyday of more kind of itinerant, as it were, worship leaders around here. So that's kind of like where Chris Tomlin had his like starting to rise into fame. So there's kind of two different stories. And so if you're looking at it from a narrative perspective, what it looks like is that people started to say, oh, it might be better for us to house these itinerant worship leaders in a faith community. And so it seems like Bethel is probably the prototypical example of this. Hillsong, for the most part, as far as we can tell, kind of raised their worship leaders. Like, they kind of came up through the ranks, and they had their own college, and they pushed them out that way. Whereas Bethel was actually like, oh, look, here's some wonderful, gifted, talented people. Let's kind of bring them into the umbrella. And the distinguishing between them as a record label and them as a church is kind of harder to tell, to be honest. So that was a lot that was happening. So all that's just background. So why did Phil Wickham not do that? I don't know that we have a really solid answer for that. He maybe wanted to kind of play the field, and that's and maybe why for so long because he's been making music since 2000, like mid 2000s. So it was like, it's not his first rodeo, but it took him a long time to get notoriety, and so maybe it would have been faster actually if he had lodged into a church. We don't know.
Hi, thanks. Maybe I missed this, but can you just talk about who you sent the survey to, or was there a criteria for, did they have to have an established praise and worship band going, or was this across North America, or just who you sent the survey to?
Fantastic. No, it was readily available on the internets, so anybody could have filled it out. Obviously, we presumed that people were only going to fill it out if they had interest in that context, right? So like, my mom didn't fill out the survey. So it was just more like, and that's why I think you see it weighted as so heavily on the Wesleyan, as I mentioned earlier, is because myself and Mike Tapper, we shared heavily within our contexts. So admittedly, we're very grateful for the fact that we have had a lot of press in the last year. Grateful and also kind of wearied by the fact we've had a lot of press last year, because it's like, it's great, but it's also like, it's kind of skewed the survey. But at that point in time, we did not have very much press. And so it really was beholden upon just us to like send it via links to people that we knew. So that is why we put it in Facebook groups. So Elias Dummer, who's one of the people on the team, is very active in what are relatively ecumenical Facebook worship leader groups. And so that's why I think you do see a pretty good cross-section of people, but heavier in the streams in which we swim, I guess. Yes, sir. Not a chance. Yep. So Ryan said he had a short question. It's not really true. He said, he asked if we had looked into what the age of the songwriters were, because, and justifiably so, if we said that one of the survey questions was, how do you feel like, why do you feel people are writing these songs? And a high one was based on events in their own life. And so, a 20-year-old might have a lot less events in their life that would dictate something that they could write that would be kind of deep. Or frankly, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but maybe would they have a lot to grieve? Would they have a lot of those kind of the losses and the more reflective and contemplative side of what worship music can be? So no, we did not look into the ages of them at all. I've really given you the goods. There's not a whole lot that we've delved into deeply that hasn't here. Kind of what's next for us in the next few months is to release a number of synthetic articles where we really cross-reference the phase 1 quantity stuff with the phase 2 quality stuff. So more of that will start to come out here. But you've obviously hit a bit of that could be something that we keep in mind. as Adam was saying, Gen Z worship leaders seem to think that, I'm in Canada, so it's Gen Z. Gen Z worship leaders seem to think that by a wider margin, they would attribute divine inspiration to the reason why songs were written, but millennials were a little bit more inclined to say that it would be more related to financial, monetary, commercial opportunities. Yeah. Yes, sir. No. But so the question was there any research done into whether or not oh, wait, I don't need to say that because they already are the crew, right? Can they see this question? Hi, guys. This isn't on, is it? Where are they? No, but where's the, can I see them? Hi, folks. So glad you're here. God bless you, man. Listen, I've attended conferences by Zoom, and you deserve a medal at this point. You guys are troopers. So, should I repeat the question, or has everybody seen that in the chat? Okay, so no. I mean, obviously, we can probably see where you're going, but that would be more than conjecture. That would be me daydreaming at this point. So no, we have no data on that at all. Yep, it's a great question. So the question was, were there comment boxes after all the questions? And if so, or regardless, to what degree did people actually use the comment boxes? Yeah. Yes, I actually kept looking. I was like, can I find the survey still online? And I couldn't find it online. It's still on there, but it's obviously not published anymore, so I couldn't get access to it. Yes, comment boxes for every question. And I don't know, would you say half? Maybe half, Adam? Yeah. Right, which makes it harder to collate afterwards. So admittedly, right, because you're just like, how do I move that into a yes, no on the axis? Yeah. Yeah, so admittedly, I've had the opportunity over the last few days to sit in on some wonderful sessions, and the ones that are very academic, they will only say the things that they can prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt. And so that's great, and that's what should be done in so many contexts. But we also have, because we code switch, we can flip from one place to another. There's times where we get a chance to be a little bit more theoretical. I'm being a little more theoretical today. Yes, sir. I'll ask that. I'll come back to you, sir. Yes, this gentleman here. Yes. So you first, you next, and then you. Yes. Yes. Names are not my forte. Yes. Excellent question. So now that we kind of have looked into the under the hood, as I've said a few times, and had an opportunity to see not just how the industry works, but how some people feel about it, would I, as a worship leader, change the way that I approach things? It's something I meant to say, and I'm glad that you've given me the opportunity to say this. Not only do I have the card-carrying status that puts me in a certain faith tradition, I actually like on Sunday, I led most of these songs. So I'm firmly embedded in the very tradition that you guys are that we're looking at, and it's kind of like when you find out how hot dogs are made, and you can still eat hot dogs, you just don't talk about it while you're eating hot dogs. I think that's kind of where I've landed at this point in time. And so I'm kidding, but also kind of not. So like there's, as someone who's adjacent to academics, it can be tough to worship God 9 times out of 10 sometimes, because you're sitting there, you're analyzing, you're thinking, you're wondering about the text, you're wondering about the meter, you're wondering about the manipulation, all these things. But guys, we still need to go to church. So there are times where I have to just kind of not just hold my nose and do it, but just to realize that it's one thing to analyze things, it's another thing to kind of live them out. Now, have I changed some of my approaches? I have, but we're not an agenda-driven group, contrary to what some of the media presentations of our work have been like. We really are just trying to present the information as unvarnished as we can, interestingly, but not varnished. Does that make sense? Good. Yes?
I assume, it's like, ooh, this is tough. I assume that there's going to be ongoing work on this, so maybe there's another phase of this that's going to come out. What are we going to do to make sure that the respondents are more inclusive? I see the information about the denominations and how it was sent out. I looked online to see like how this survey came about. I've heard Shannon talk about the work because I'm a graduate of that school. But I am curious to know how or what the panel of folks, the 6 of you, are doing to make sure that Black voices are included, that Latinx voices are included, that queer people are a part of this conversation, because there are so many circles that are singing this music that perhaps will feel differently in 10 years, as a result of things that come out. So like, what are you and the panel doing to make sure that the respondents the next go round are representative of the church writ large? Because I didn't see it, and I would have loved to have responded. Yeah.
Well, can you spread the word next time? That would be really, really helpful. Yeah, so that's kind of what that'd be one of the major fringe benefits of these kinds of conversations, is to kind of keep in communication and spread it around. So thank you very much for that question. There are 2 prongs to it, as we mentioned. We've got the quantitative. So the thing is that for this particular study, we were really looking at this subset of churches and this subset of material. So the second question is, how do we get more diverse people to talk about the way that they feel about whatever the quantity is, right? So you have to, we can broaden what the quantity is, and we joke about it all the time. If anybody here has incredibly deep pockets, then you could write a check today to give us somebody who could spend nothing but the next year on the phone with Black churches in North America saying, hey, what songs did you sing on Sunday? Because that's kind of, as far as we can tell at this point in time, what would be required to get the kind of representation from, like, let's say that subset of churches. Because if they're not reporting through CCLI, and if they're not reporting through Praise, like if there's no data set, then there's nothing to analyze. So getting that data set is going to be something that we're incredibly interested in for a phase 3, even though we don't know yet how to do it. So like that will expand the songs, the artists, and maybe the industry mechanisms that one could look at. As far as the next one, how people feel about it, if we go ahead and do a similar approach going forward, 100%, we would love to have more and more people respond to it. It would admittedly change the information. If you were asking somebody who doesn't like or ascribe in any way to this, how they feel about it, that may not tell you much about how the people who are choosing and programming these things. Yes, you have a question? Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, right. Mm. Well, second of all, can we talk later? Because I'd like to know. And then first of all, I'll just cap off by saying you mentioned a magic word in there, which is maybe a carrot to be dangled, which is planning center, because I do think planning center is more representational across the board, and we have the infant-sized conversations with them that hopefully will burgeon into a lot. If we could get access to that data, that would really change the water and the beans. That's a New Brunswick statement. Does that translate here? Water and the beans? No. It would change things. It would be good. Okay. Yeah. Please, Ryan.
So the statistic about in 2017, the jump of the influence of songs that were released as singles. Did you analyze that at all, or do you have any opinions about the significance about that?
Yep. So Elias Dummer was the one who kind of had to arm wrestle Adam and Shannon a lot on this to try to figure out what does this mean. So the challenge with singles, you guys know Spotify? Anybody ever heard of Spotify? Listen, if you can invest in Spotify now, you might do okay. It has really transformed a lot of things about the music industry. It's not alone. There are other, streaming platforms and whatnot. So the bottom line is there could be an argument made that almost every song is released in single format now. And I think that was how we were concerned that some people might perceive the data, but that's not what's happening here. We really are talking about when Maverick City releases an album, but they have 2 or 3 of the songs that they are singling out as being something that's going to be promoted on curated lists on Spotify, those kinds of things, which is kind of a lot more than radio. Radio is one of the questions that we ask, how do you feel about songs that are on the radio? Everyone's like, no, I don't care about that. And yet, often there seems to be such an analog between songs that do well on the radio and songs that are led on Sunday mornings. Surprise, it's bizarre. But so we did look into it. At the end of the day, we feel like it's a compelling thing that leads us to believe that if an industry partner, because sometimes it's the artists, but very often it's the labels, for lack of a better word. If they go, this is the one that we're going to put forward, it seems like, in particular, over the last 10 years, that has been one of the number one definers of whether or not that song is going to chart in churches. So, I'm not much of a Spotify user. I'm an Apple Music guy. Call me old school. So, when I go, if you take a look at, the album, there's, there's a little silver star next to the song, and it's the one that came out first. So, hey, the album's going to drop next month, Elevation's new album, but you can listen to one song now. And, when you do that, it just, I don't know, it seems to work. Now, are they better songs? Maybe, and that'd be a fun thing for musicologists to try to analyze. Are there qualities about these songs that actually are better? Very possibly. It has to be. Sometimes that's the case, but quite likely that's not why those songs are rising to the top. Correct. I received that. I received that word. So the question was, is there going to be a next phase? And if so, have we been looking into grants or funding for it? And the answer is there definitely, so by the end, as we were getting across the finish line from phase 2, we were all kind of looking at each other and do we want to see each other by Zoom anymore? Are we kind of I like you and stuff, but there's been a lot. I think we're feeling a little bit more energized now coming through and being able to get some more. I think phase 2 reception has been more positive than phase 1 reception was. So all that to say, yes, we intend to go forward. We are hoping to the point that was asked earlier, diversify our, if not our core group, our affiliate group, so that we have more and broader voices that are part of it. And we are certainly hoping to re-up our funding so that we can kind of do the more difficult work ahead, because it will be very labor intensive to be able to do that. By all means, yes. Call your friends. Tell your friends. Yeah. You guys have had some great questions. I appreciate it because I came in light on the. I was like, I don't really want to talk a lot. I much prefer answering questions than I do to like trying to. We good? Anybody else or? Mm-hmm. Yes, right. So we've been wrestling with this a little bit. So it's a group of 5 people who, like I said, have been kind of working on this, and something came up the other day where we said, how might we want to be pastoral with this data? How might we want to try to help people? And that is the heart of the people who are in the group. But if I could put our pictures up there, you'd see that we look similar in some respects. I'm one of the oldest people in the group. If I let this grow out, I'll look even wiser. But we're not all the same. So even though we look the same, we all kind of have slightly different theological backgrounds. We come from different places. So there is no easy, uniform answer for how I might pastorally use this data, or how Adam might pastorally use this data, or how Shannon or Elias or Mike, like we're all different people. We're not ordained in the same tradition. We're all Christians and we believe in Jesus Christ, but we do kind of come at this from different places, which frankly, I think has been part of the strength of it, because it helps us to be, kind of knocking down things that are a little bit too conjecture-ish for our kind of corporate releases. If you take a look on our website, the things that are released as articles are released by the Worship Leader Research team. So it's like a 5-person team. It's not a single person who writes it. Obviously, I'm speaking right now, but I'm speaking on behalf of the team. It's just a way of saying we're trying not to be overly prescriptive with how people will use the data, because I don't know that we have a univocal approach, even from our own team, to be honest with you. We want to give the best data possible so that somebody in your faith tradition, somebody in your church, somebody in your community could say, in light of this, how then shall I live, I guess, is kind of how we would leave it.
Interesting to hear you say, I don't know what you said, you're trying to be descriptive, you're trying to represent people, not have an agenda, kind of, just present the state of affairs. But yet it's so often, at least, watching this fabulous work happen, it seems like there's this agenda that other people take that's like, look how wrong this is, like, look how terrible this is. Do you find that, and maybe you don't feel that way, maybe that's something I'm reading onto it, but do you find and this is going to be speculative, I'm guessing, but the worship leaders who are responding are like, this seems good. Like, this seems like a good system we've got here. No issue with the fact that I think most of them are in response to, commercial contracts or whatever it is. And media and academics are like, this is so wrong. Do you notice like a tension or a difference in how people are interpreting this depending on where they're coming at it from?
Yes, very good. So yes, we have noticed that. So I alluded to kind of some of the negative. When I say negative, I mean like negatively framed press. That was kind of, and I tell you, like a negatively framed article shares a lot better than a positively framed article. Like there's no a kitten rescued from tree. Like it just doesn't go viral. Although that's what most of my Twitter feed is like. I saw this really cute one with this dog earlier. That's not important right now. So yes, it has been largely negative, and yet. Different media end up going different ways. So a couple of our folks were on Julie Roy's podcast. If anybody who knows who she is, she's kind of like an investigative journalist who has spent a lot of time tearing down churches like Hillsong and Bethel. Again, for different reasons. I feel like that it's important to say, like, Hillsong has had like legitimate moral failures and has had legitimate legal troubles. Like these things about it's not up for debate. Like it is what it is at this point in time. Bethel is in a kind of whole different category. That's why I think we want to kind of, whether you like them or not is not important, but it's important to distinguish. There's different reasons why people might feel uncomfortable about these things. So her tack in this one conversation was to say, like, basically it's time to stop singing all of this music, right? Because X, Y, Z. And obviously a lot of people were like, yeah, you know what, you're right, it's time. But I would say the majority of people came back and said, or the majority of people who are commenting on this really said, like, nah, like Shout to the Lord is still a banger and I'm gonna do it. Like nothing's gonna change that. And And I led Joe to the Lord last week. So like, I was like, I kind of like, you can understand how it's difficult. I think one of the things that if I'm, if it's okay for me to be this kind of speculative, I don't have good language for this yet, and I keep trying to get there, which is that I want to respond to somebody and say, a very common thing would be like, even David fell short of the glory of God, and we still recite the hymns. And I'm like, the Psalms. I'm like, it's true. That is true. But I don't know if you would do it like the day after he slept with Bathsheba. And I'm like, there has to be some, it's not just a restoration thing. There has to be some sort of way of like saying there's grace and there's mercy and everyone has fallen. But actively supporting someone or an institution who is in free fall, I don't know about that. And anyway, so this is, hi, my name is Marc. This is Marc's opinion. This is not, but it's being brought up a lot. And so I don't really know exactly what we as a team are supposed to say to that. I think we're supposed to say, I don't know, what do you think? And kind of push it back into the local congregation. So some of them have, like I've had somebody who's commented to me and say, thank you so much. This has changed the way that I program my services now. I don't use these people. I've also had someone come to me and say personally, like, thank you so much. I now feel more confident and comfortable in understanding how I can use these songs responsibly. And so to me, that's the best kind of scenario, is just helping people think through these things. I heard somebody say last night, it's not about jumping to conclusions. It's about walking to conclusions. So.
Well, this has been such a rich discussion. Thank you all for your comments and questions, and thank you so much, Marc, for walking us through this and sharing so much insight on behalf of yourself and the group. Just thank you to all of you for the good work that is happening here. Thanks to those of you who joined online and asked questions. That was a great addition. I think we are on a break now until 3:15, so we'll see you at the next session, whatever it is for you.